You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Hey everybody, welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and I am here, as always, with my co-host, Mr. Brett Newcomb.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm great.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
I think the sound
As Willie Nelson once said, I woke up this morning not dead again.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the problem is, see how your mic is turned sideways?
No?
No, the actual mic itself.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. There you go.
Is that better?
That's better.
There we go.
Yeah, okay.
Somebody must have been dusting while it was gone.
I diagnosed and solved an actual technical problem.
Yeah, is it plugged in?
Yay me.
Yeah. Good for you.
So you had a bout.
I did. I had about 10 days worth of pretty devastating illness. I had something I'd never had before, pneumonia. But I'm better now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you've talked about that you are in your 70s.
Yeah, 72, almost 73.
And so were you afraid that you had COVID?
No, because I got 2 COVID tests right away, and they both said, no, you don't.
But I'm saying even before you had those tests, like did it occur to you, did you think, oh my God, I might have COVID?
No, because the symptoms that I was having were sort of lower on the food chain for COVID symptoms.
Okay.
So I wasn't particularly, and I hadn't been anywhere. I hadn't done anything. I've been wearing a mask. I've been social distancing.
Yeah.
I've been home for 3 months. So I didn't really think I'd been exposed. But I was prepared to be told, you know, hey, bud, it's the end. You're checking out.
Well, I don't know that it would have been that dramatic.
Well, if you told me I had COVID, that's what I would think.
Well, that's what I was going to, so that was going to be my next question. So if that had occurred to you that, oh, maybe I have COVID, did it occur to you, this could be bad?
This could be the end of the run. Yeah. That's exactly what I thought.
Because, I think that people rightly are concerned, and even if you're younger and
the first 3 months of this, everybody was saying the ones that are most likely to die, the ones that are 75 and older.
Yeah.
So, I'm not 75, but I'm very close.
Yeah.
But I don't have any other major health issues.
Right.
So, I didn't think so, and I hadn't been exposed that I knew of, so I thought it was okay. But yeah, I could panic like the rest of them.
Yeah. And sometimes people become convinced that there's something wrong with them, whether there is or not.
You mean hypochondriacal?
Well, we've talked about that.
Yeah.
And so that is called a psychosomatic disorder.
Yeah. It's in the list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I like to say that word, hypochondriacal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when you say it, then
it's a mouthful.
Then people are like, "Are you talking about me?"
Yeah, they're taking their temperature, they're checking their pulse. Like, could I have that? Do I have that? Yeah.
Well, and it is amazing how I've had clients who have taken psychology classes, and I know that you've experienced this also.
Oh my God! When you teach abnormal psych,
Yeah.
in high school or college, we've done both, the university levels. Every particular subset of data that you study, people become convinced either that they have it or somebody they know has it. Oh my God, that's my mother.
Right.
Oh my God, that's my uncle. Oh, that's me. That's my girlfriend. And they become almost obsessed with the parameters for, schizophreniform disorder. What does that mean? Do I have that? And I would always tell them, you'll do that. And then when we were teaching clinical skills in graduate school, we would say to people, whenever we teach you a new theoretical underpinning, you're going to become convinced that it's the best thing since sliced bread. Oh my God, that makes perfect sense. Now I understand. And then we'll teach you new, and you're like, oh crap, wait a minute, this makes more sense. So you just go through those. So people process that way.
And why do we process that way when we're faced with or given new information?
I think we're grasping for answers to the unknown. We want clarity, and we hope somebody can give it to us, and we think maybe they have because it's presented in some sort of logical way, and it's new stuff, and we're trying to digest it, and it's like, well, that must be the answer. And then we discover that it doesn't make. I mean, for instance, you are much more, I would say that you are much more cognizant and conscious of like diagnostic parameters and labels than I am. I'm much more of an Irwin Yalom approach that to me
Did you see Irvin Yalom's going to have a conference in December?
That's going to be hard.
Well,
because he died.
Yalom died?
Yalom died, yeah. But it could be his son. But at any rate, Yalom always preached that the client is not the diagnosis. The client is the client. And you need to attend to the client and learn their patterns and recognize their issues and help them face themselves however they need to improve the quality of their life, to stop doing self-sabotaging behaviors. And so it's not a priority to come up with a diagnosis that'll satisfy some insurance company. Here, let's put this number and this label on this person, because then people tend to see the number and the label, and they don't tend to see the person. So they'll say, "Oh, you are depressed," instead of "you have," you're a depressive, instead of "you have a depression," and so let's fight the depression. And I tend to agree that way. I don't try to put a label on somebody very readily at all. I'm just more interested in what can we do to make progress. How can we make your life be better?
Do you think that there is any benefit to diagnostic labels?
I think there can be if you're dealing with an extremely severe situation, maybe that requires hospitalization, and you're dealing with other professionals who interact at different times with this individual and need overlapping data. So then that, if you have an accurate diagnosis, then they at least have a sort of a prepackaged understanding of the kind of issues somebody's dealing with, but they still don't know that individual person. So they have to spend time with that person to get that. But outside of that, I see it primarily as a vehicle for insurance companies to deny payment.
So then you would give a diagnostic label to a client who wanted to submit to their insurance company.
I would give
Otherwise, you would never
give the least severe, most legitimate diagnosis. I wouldn't make something up. I wouldn't blow something off. But I wouldn't go to the. I mean, like for instance, I'd never give an Axis 2 personality disorder diagnosis before I gave several Axis 1 level diagnoses. And I probably would never give us one anyway, primarily because in the medical hierarchy, my license allows me to do that, but it's not as respected or accepted up the food chain. And so if the psychiatrist involved or a medical doctor involved says, "Oh, this person has narcissistic personality disorder," then the insurance companies are like, oh, okay. But if I say that, then they say, well, wait a minute, who are you? So that's part of the games that get played that have nothing to do with doing therapy.
So if a client said to you, "I need to know what you think I am," what would you say to that person?
Confused, in pain.
So you would refrain from...
I would reframe the conversation and say, "You are not a label. We can talk about the concerns that you have and how they impact you, but I'm reluctant to assign you a categorical name that you can start calling yourself." Like, well, because then you can give up. You can say, "Well, hey, I'm depressed, so to hell with it."
Well, and that's the issue with the psychosomatic disorders is once you know what the diagnostic criteria are for the label, then you start trying to manifest that, even if it's unconscious.
You said I'm hypochondriacal. Do I have a fever? Wait a minute, let me take my temperature. Let me check my pulse. My heart beats faster. Maybe I'm dying.
Right. And then now I'm anxious about taking my temperature. I feel like I need to do that multiple times a day. And then that's what in psychology we call a secondary problem. Now I'm anxious about taking my temperature because I think I might be hypochondriacal. And so now that's causing me a problem in my life because I always have to have a thermometer.
A primary example are like eating disorders where young girls in particular initially began to make themselves throw up by putting their finger in their throat.
And then they
learned how to just look at the toilet and think they wanted to vomit, and they thought they really had an accomplishment because now I have control over this. But then it took control over them, and they just vomited, and they couldn't not vomit. So the progression becomes more and more severe, more damaging to your health, more disruptive to your quality of life, that's why the diagnostic label of hypochondriasis is of concern when somebody gets to the extreme end. I mean, all these things are on a continuum of severity. So you want to try to figure out where they are on the spectrum, but then back them down in severity as much as you can. Help them get better about managing it. Because if their body takes it over, just like the girls that were vomiting, then they're in much more trouble.
Right. And I was listening to NPR once, and they have a show on there called Radio Lab. And on this show, they were talking about how there was this girl in Germany and this girl in Australia, and both of them, and I don't think it was Germany and Australia, it was Germany and some other country that was in Europe. They both had the same
Austria.
name. One of them let go of a red balloon and it blew over the border, and the other girl found it in her backyard, and they both had the same name. And how crazy is that? What's the statistical probability? And they had this guy come on, and he said, it's the same as anybody else. I mean, 1 in 5. And they're like, well, what are you talking about? And he said, well, if you do the math just says somebody let go of a balloon, somebody else found it. So what is it about us that makes us look at a story like that and find the, incredible divine...
Which we've all read about the butterfly effect. I know that if I sneeze, somebody in Brazil is going to kill a rainforest. And so I have incredible importance in the universe.
And what they said is that the human brain is designed to identify patterns. We live by being able to have predictable outcomes to things in our lives. And so we create patterns where none exist if they aren't there.
Right.
And so when we hear about things that are happening or diagnostic categories that we think we might be a part of, then we create the actual disorder that we were afraid that we had in the first place, and that then becomes a real thing. So it isn't...
Some of the schools of philosophy teach the same thing. Mm-hmm. They teach that there's a teleological function.
Yeah.
That in the universe out there somewhere, there's an element that is chairness. Mm-hmm. And in order for something to be a chair, it has to match the basic ingredients of chairness. So again, you come back to how important is the diagnosis? How important is the label? What are we working to achieve in therapy? Mm-hmm. We want to make your quality of life better, less painful, less disruptive, give you more power and more freedom and more joy in being who you are, and not have you expend all of your energies chasing these tails, these rabbits that don't go anywhere.
And so I ask clients all the time, I don't understand why it is that people will say, a couple of good things happened this week, so now I'm freaked out because I know something bad's going to happen. But I've never heard anybody say
for the other shoe to fall.
A bunch of really bad things happened this week, so now I'm golden because something good's bound to happen. No one ever looks at that.
Frame it that way, no.
Right, that positive side. And I feel like the same thing is true in psychotherapy. If I say, oh, Brett, I think maybe you have borderline personality disorder, and then you want to embody all of you're now on the internets, looking up
reading
everything.
All that stuff. Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, I checked that box, I checked that box, and I don't check that box, but I'm going to.
Well, that's the same thing people do. We were saying earlier, teaching psychology and teaching abnormal psych, you're in class and you're teaching these things, and everybody's looking at them saying, well, that's my aunt, that's my next door neighbor. I bet I've got that. My grandfather had that.
Oh my God! In grad school, when you first get in, right, by the end, you're just like, all I need is the piece of paper so I can earn some money. Right. But in the beginning, everybody's like on fire.
Yeah. Save the world.
Oh yeah,
I'm on a mission from God.
Oh yeah. And when we would do role plays in grad school, and people would you'd be talking, and we'd be talking about these diagnoses, and everybody'd be like, yeah, I got that person in my family.
See, I wouldn't do that in grad school. As a teacher, I wouldn't do role playing. I said, don't play a role. Be yourself.
Yeah.
Don't share anything you're not willing to share, but be yourself. Be real. We're learning skills about talking to real people. Don't act.
But you would acknowledge that you were the exception and not the rule.
Yes. Okay. I've always been the exception. Yes. Yeah.
But so what makes it hard for a person to hear, okay, if you're going to embody all of the characteristics of this negative label, what makes it hard to hear, why don't you try and embody all of the positive characteristics of this other label? Because I can't get clients to wrap their head around that.
So I don't know that I know the answer to that. What I know is that in my experience as a child growing up, I never got a positive frame. I always got a negative one. And it was always about consequences. If you don't get it right, you're going to get hurt. You're going to get punished. There's going to be something bad happens. And you're not capable of doing this. You're not capable of doing that. You're not capable of doing this. So they tried to steer me in the direction that they wanted me to go. And that was cultural. That was sociocultural. My sociocultural background was not one that said, oh, you are golden. You're the golden child. You're beautiful. You're fantastic. You're smart. You're clever. Nobody ever said that. I'm hesitating right now because I think over the last several years, the United States as a cultural phenomenon has moved in the direction of promoting false self-esteem among children.
Yeah.
We've had a number of conversations about that. So I think it was an effort to turn that pattern around and give our children those positive strokes that we didn't get and our parents didn't get.
Right.
I don't know where we are now. I'm off the grid as far as doing the research or tracking large numbers or any of that stuff. But I am concerned about it on both ends of the spectrum. Again, I think they're on a continuum, and you have to get somewhere in between. And part of the challenge of raising a child is the handoff. You guide them, you instruct them, you teach them, but at some point they have to take self-ownership. When I work with adolescents all the time, the analogy that I would use is you're in the back seat of the car that's your life. And up until this point, grown-ups have been driving it. Your parents tell you, the police tell you, the school teachers tell you, this is what you have to do, this is how you have to be. But at some point, you have to get in the front seat and start driving. And the thing that makes the distinction of whether or not you're able to do that is how much responsibility you're able to take on.
Right.
You're going to pay the cost of your decisions, whether you want to or not. So how well can you do that determines if you can become a free and independent autonomous adult, or if somebody else is still going to be driving the car, whether that's your wife or your boss or the officer in the Army or whoever it may be.
Right.
Do you want to drive the car?
Yeah.
And a lot of the kids will look at me and go, no, I don't want to drive the car.
Right, exactly, because I tell people all the time, you will never have more freedom in life than you are willing to accept responsibility for.
To pay for. Yeah. Exactly.
And, I tell them all the time, I'm one of the most free people in the world. I have no boss. I don't answer to anybody, but I don't ever take a day off work because if I don't go to work, I don't get paid. Right. And so you're never going to have more freedom than you're willing to take responsibility for. The most free person in the world is the person who's willing to accept the most responsibility.
Yeah.
And people don't understand that, and if they can wrap their head around that, I think it can be very elucidating, but I think it's really, really hard for people to think, okay, yes, I'm willing to accept that responsibility. And that's where, when we talk about this idea of, this false projection of self-esteem, I think is a real problem, because what happens is we want to give kids this idea of false self-esteem. You're the greatest. You can do anything, but we never want to give them the opportunity to write their own ship.
And we never let them fail. We don't want to let them pay the bill.
We want to insulate them from any negative consequence. You can't do both. If you're going to tell these children, hey, you're the best thing since sliced bread, you also have to give them the opportunity to pick themselves up when they fall.
Well, and Aristotle said there are natural leaders and natural followers. And so by that, I understand what he meant is there are large blocks of people that just want somebody to tell them what to do.
Sure.
And so they will give themselves in service to a religious leader or a political leader, and do the things that person, you see the world out of the prism of the leader's words and eyes instead of their own.
Right.
And they will deny their own observational experience. I saw this happen. No, the leader said that happened, so that must be what it is.
Exactly.
Whether we're talking quasi-religion or whether we're talking politics. And it's disturbing to see it in operation, because it's non-logical. It's non-evidentiary. It's non-reality based. So what puts people in that position to have them embrace that as a way of living? Because they're not willing to pay the freight. They're not willing to look at the truth as they experience it in their own reality.
Yeah.
What are you going to believe? Me or your lying eyes?
Exactly. And, even when we talk about psychosomatic disorders, because I've had clients who have actually manifested very real, even pseudo-seizure disorders that are based on
conversion disorders. Yeah, exactly.
And in the end, what it really comes down to is being able to help that person accept responsibility for changing that in their life. And it's really hard for people who don't want to take that responsibility to accept that, but it's the only way out of the nightmare.
Yes.
And so when we're trying to encourage people to take responsibility, to be able to change these factors in their lives, what do you think is the most important thing? And I'm going to tell you what I think is.
I'll go back to Yalom. Accurate, empathic reflection. Good reflective listening. This is what I hear you saying. This is what you appear to be feeling as you are saying it. Am I hearing you accurately? Am I missing something here? Help me understand, because more important than anything to me right now is to understand exactly where you are.
Yeah.
So if I'm getting it, then we're making progress. If I'm not getting it, then that's on me. I'm inadequate in some way. I've missed a clue. Please show me the clue again. And so I think that would be my answer. Accurate, reflective, empathic communication.
And I go back to Kohut and think about, mirroring.
Yeah.
And,
well, it's a very similar response.
Yeah. And I want to give that person the appropriate feedback for what I see them doing well.
Twinship
but I also,
and mirroring.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right, and idealization. So I want to present to them the best, most effective, most efficient kind of emotional regulation that they can take and model and then make a part of them through twinship. Yeah. And I think that is what we try and do. I think both of those answers are really, really good answers. And then it's up to the client. The client, so anybody who's listening to this.
It's always up to the client, Michael.
You have to understand, in the end, it doesn't matter how smart your therapist is.
Right.
It doesn't matter how many credentials
they have. It doesn't even matter if
you
lie to your therapist.
Exactly. The only thing
You're
that
either going to get
matters
something out of it if you put something in it.
is the extent to which you're willing to accept the responsibility for getting better.
Right.
And if you're willing to accept the responsibility for getting better, you'll probably get better. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't see a therapist. I think that there is benefit to that. But if you're willing to accept the responsibility for your life, then you are going to get better, whether you see a therapist, whether you look stuff up on the internet, or whether you just start living your life and start thinking of ways of how can I accept more personal responsibility and be more self-directed in the life that I'm leading.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
It's like parenting a child and teaching them language. The first thing they learn of an animal is a dog. Everything's a dog. And then you, as a parent, you say, yeah, that's a dog. That's a gray dog. That's a black dog. That's a big dog. That's a little dog. That's a cat. You teach them something else. But they start with a single individual frame. Everything is, the law of the hammer. You give a child, a 3-year-old, a hammer, everything is a nail. And so you have to teach them to discriminate, to observe, to choose, and that there are costs for their choices.
So how pedantic do you want me to get on that? So that's Jean Piaget.
It's
called assimilation, accommodation, and equilibration.
There you go.
So when you learn...
will this cup of coffee fit in this glass?
Four-legged animal is a dog. That's called assimilation. So now you've assimilated that four-legged animals are dogs.
It's also Noam Chomsky.
And now you say, when you see a cat, oh, that's a dog.
So don't we impress everybody with how much of this
when
stuff
somebody says, no, that's a cat, and you say, oh, cat is different, that's accommodation.
Yeah.
And then when you have this place where you get to, and the first one is when you go from sensory motor learning into the learning of language, your brain actually structurally changes at a foundational level, and you start using symbology to represent your thinking. That's called equilibration.
Yeah, and it requires schema.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I knew that.
You did know that.
I did know that.
Yeah. So I think our takeaway message for this episode is that we're really encouraging people to think in terms of accepting personal responsibility for their own lives, trying to find opportunities, not to look externally for why things happen to them, but to say, what can I do to try and work my way through this? Now, it may be true that you may be in a relationship with another person and you can't control that other person.
No, never.
And so the responsibility is, the only thing you can control is whether you choose to stay. And
how you choose to present yourself.
Yeah. But people are oftentimes not satisfied with the answer. Well, I want them to change.
Oh, that's almost always what you hear.
Right.
why is my mother behaving this way? Can't we fix her so she doesn't do this anymore?
Yeah. And we say, no, you have to decide how you're going to interact with her, and ultimately whether you choose to interact with her at all. That's the control that you have.
When your mother asks for volunteers, don't volunteer.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's hard for people to hear that. And so it's all about how much personal responsibility are you willing or can you accept?
Okay.
All right, so hopefully this has been good for people, and as always, the music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue, and as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.